The year is 1986 and the place is Kyoto, Japan. A group of gamer boys are attending Ritsumeikan University and preparing for a campaign of Dungeons & Dragons that will go on to shape the world of role-playing games as we know them today. That's right, Timmy. Even in Japan, before there was Pikachu or Cloud Strife, there was D&D. In 1980s Japan, though, the game was extremely niche and largely inaccessible, but it still managed to capture the imagination of some passionate kids, just as it did in Lake Geneva all those years ago. But to really understand how D&D influenced the Japanese pop culture that would go on to define an era, we need to roll it back to the very beginning. Enter Wizardry. Released in 1971, the game's engrossing first-person dungeon-crawling gameplay was an attempt by its designers to capture the essence of Dungeons & Dragons, boil it down to its purest form, and cram it into the Apple II home computer. The OG dungeon crawler was an instant hit. Soon, several Japan-only spin-offs would go into production. Today, nearly 20 Wizardry titles have been published in Japan, and the series still sees support. And so, against all odds, an obscure computer game based on D&D was inspiring an entire generation of dungeon-crawling nerds in Japan. And it's through this inspiration that we can begin mapping out D&D's campaign of influence over Japanese pop culture. Meet Hitoshi Yasuda and Ryo Mizuno. Sometime in the late 1970s, these childhood besties played Wizardry together on the Yasuda family's Apple II home computer. Seeing just how into the game his friend was, Yasuda would soon take things a step further, inviting Mizuno to play Traveler, a sci-fi tabletop RPG, over their summer vacation. The two were instantly hooked by the collaborative, open-ended gameplay and emergent narratives that only pen and paper RPGs can provide. Mizuno recalls of this time, being able to intervene in the story with my own hands. This is exactly what I was looking for. Years later, Mizuno and Yasuda would form a science fiction and fantasy club at Ritsumeikan University, and it was there that the world of Lodoss would come to life for the first time. For the uninitiated, Record of Lodoss War is basically the Critical Role of Japan. The juggernaut multimedia franchise began as a serialized replay of the homebrew D&D campaign that Mizuno was running for his college buddies. Published in Comptique magazine, the player's dialogue and the game master's narrations were written out like a play, exposing a much wider audience of readers to the idea of tabletop role-playing. Capitalizing on the success of the replays, Mizuno adapted his campaign into a series of novels published by Group SNE, which was founded by his lifelong gaming partner, Yasuda. The books were groundbreaking for their time, fusing Western fantasy tropes like elves and dwarves with shonen-esque storytelling. Record of Lodoss War exploded in popularity, spawning sequels, an OVA series, an audio drama, manga, video games, action figures, and more. But as Lodoss War grew as a franchise, Group SNE was forced to abandon the D&D rule system due to licensing issues. SNE's first tabletop RPG, titled Record of Lodoss War Companion, was published in 1986. But just 3 years later, the system was adapted into Sword World, Japan's true answer to Dungeons & Dragons. Because they were expensive and hard to find in Japan, Group SNE decided to ditch the 7 polyhedral dice set used with D&D in favor of the common D6. An easy-to-understand 2d6 dice rolling mechanic, combined with the popularity of the Lodoss War franchise, allowed Sword World to reach a level of popularity that D&D was never able to achieve in Japan. This era is now referred to as the Golden Age of tabletop role-playing games by Japanese enthusiasts. Dozens of light novels, replays, and other spin-offs would soon be published in the coming years. In 2008, Sword World 2.0 was released. In 2018, Sword World 2.5, the game's most current edition, hit shelves. But despite a diverse and vibrant market, TRPGs were never able to break through into the Japanese mainstream as they have in the West. Today, Call of Cthulhu reigns supreme as the country's most popular title. 5th edition D&D has been fully localized, and while its popularity has grown over time, Sword World remains Japan's preferred fantasy system. In the years since, Group SNE has created TRPGs for other franchises like Dark Souls, Elden Ring, Konosuba, and Goblin Slayer, the latter two of which are actually based on the author's own Sword World and D&D campaigns. In fact, you may be surprised to learn how D&D has impacted some of your favorite Japanese media. Hidetaka Miyazaki, president of From Software, wasn't allowed to play video games as a kid. Instead, he browsed English D&D books. Unable to read the rules, he did what any kid would do. He pored over the pictures and allowed his imagination to run wild. That experience was a major influence on the design and gameplay of the Soulsborne franchise, hence the mind flayers, giant crayfish, and other such things. Final Fantasy's original entries featured a Vancian magic system, just like D&D. In Japanese, the mage class is referred to as Mahotsukai, which literally translates as magic user, terminology that was pulled directly from D&D along with the fighter. So, are Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson really responsible for a cultural revolution in Japan? Well, kinda, yeah. Wizardry and its contemporaries like Ultima are clearly the granddaddy of all JRPGs. But without D&D, there would be no Wizardry or Ultima. And without Wizardry or Ultima, there would be no Final Fantasy or Dragon Quest, no Pokemon, and no Dark Souls. And without Final Fantasy, there would very likely be no Critical Role. It all comes full circle, man. The gaming industry likes to separate JRPGs and Western RPGs into two distinct genres. But in truth, they all share the same family tree. Okay, I'm gonna go raid a yellow submarine and look for some old RPG books. But I'll see you next time, and until then, venture forth.
Wow, France.